Hey everyone, I decided that I wanted to do monotypes today instead of just paint making. So this is a more process technique way of making a print. It's not exactly a multiple print, it's more of a one-off, which, you know, monotype. So I have an etching press, which is what I would normally use to make my monotypes, but because not many people have an etching press and I haven't had one for most of my art life, I want to show you how I do it with the pin press, which is a very heavy weighted metal roll. And I think sometimes people even use a spoon or a Baron or a you can even use like a bottle, like a wine bottle or something. You just want to use something pretty solid to make even pressure. What I'm going to be doing is just making a little painting and showing you essentially how I do a monotype today. So with this being one of the materials, the main materials, I also use plexiglass as my surface to paint on. Monotypes in printmaking is an indirect form of making an image. So I'm not painting directly onto my paper, I'm painting onto a surface and then I'm making an impression into the paper with this surface. So I also have printmaking paper, which I use Reeves BFK or Arches. I soak this paper in water, and you want it to make sure that it's pretty well soaked so it will receive the ink, the paint. You can also use something that's just from a pack of printmaking paper. Anything that you have, you want to make sure it is printmaking paper so that it can be wet and then dried and have paint applied to it. You don't want to use regular lined paper. And then you want to make sure you have a towel because you're going to dry that paper. You don't want it to be sopping wet when you make your print or when you pull your print. So those are the materials I have. Most people, when they're doing monotypes, I think that they actually use printmaking ink. I use what's on my palette for when I'm making paintings. Just the leftovers. So this is another exercise that I do to loosen up my creative brain in the mornings or in the evenings after I've done a painting and I just want to get something done, and instead of just doing a drawing, I make a painting, but a monotype. I have a lot of different surfaces here and I have a few different size pieces of paper soaking. I settled on, I think this is like an 8x10 size image. And usually people will clean these a little bit more, but I'm kind of a messy person and I get it clean enough. You just don't want remaining paint on it and you don't want to have things raised so that it will make an impression into your paper. You want to get started on making a painting? Alright, so again, this is just like I set everything up just like I would if I were to make a painting on canvas. This is just regular oil paint. This is not necessarily the most archival form of printmaking. I think if you were to use paper that was primed or treated for oil paint, then it might be a little bit more archival. But I'm just saying they're not going to last hundreds of years. They'll probably last, 50 years at least before the oil seeps through. This is paint that I made yesterday in our demo, so I'm going to actually use some of that today. green. some of this pink. You also want to make sure you have a solvent to clean and a paper towel, because again, this is oil and you want to make sure that you're able to wipe it up. It's not going to be water. You could also do acrylic or ink monotypes. You could do anything on this surface as long as it doesn't dry too fast, and then print. I store my brushes in olive oil because olive oil does not dry like linseed oil, and you know, ideally you wash your brushes every day, but I am a bad artist and let things linger. I also like saving water, so. All right, I'm not really sure what I want to paint, and normally I paint something representational. And as you can see, I'm sort of surrounded by a lot of objects, so I'm just going to be tuning into something in this room and making a print from that, or drawing from that. You want to paint very, very thinly.
Someone is asking, how do you store them, up or down?
My brushes? Down. Or are you talking about a monotype?
I assume the brush.
This is a very, very simple process. And the results are really interesting too, because it's not being absorbed into the canvas. You're having your paint sit on this plexiglass, and then when it is pushed into the paper, all of those marks show up. And it really does give an interesting look. You can almost kind of see what it looks like in the light, and it will look very similar to this. So you can get something darker with a few layers if you wanted to do that, or you can leave it a little bit see-through, or transparent, which I tend to really like.
The person said, yes, your brushes.
You can kind of see them being stored in the downward position. They will bend your brushes, so just be careful the way that you put them in there or store them long term. And right now I'm just looking at a little still life that I have on this table over here, which is a bromeliad and a little vessel that I made. There's lots to draw from in here.
Someone's asking, how do you thin your paint?
You can use linseed oil. You can use, I like to use this Gamblin solvent-free stuff. You can use it as a gel, or you can use this.
I see.
I don't know. It's very malleable, but otherwise I use just regular Gamsol to thin it. My neighbors seem to be moving some stuff, so it's a little loud right now. Again, you want to keep this very, very thin. This bromeliad has a little bit of pink and red in it, so I kind of want to put that in. And again, you can kind of see how transparent it is. You guys know how I feel about leopard print at this point. So let's put it in here. The great thing about this is you can work back into it after you've printed, because sometimes things don't register or they don't pull up like you want, and so I'll work back into it. You really want to make sure that there's no extra layers of paint on here. All right, I like that.
Someone asked, are you printing on oil paper?
You probably should. I'm not. I'm using Arches or BFK or Strathmore, which is just regular printmaking paper. A little bit of blue in there. So now I want to think about my negative space. Let's use that pink from yesterday. It's pretty wet. think that looks pretty good. All right, now what I'm gonna do is go get my paper that has been soaking, and I wanna make sure it fits this size piece of plexi. So we'll go get that. It is a lot of stuff in the studio. So you can kind of see how I'm soaking my paper here. You want to make sure that it is not sopping wet. And that looks like a good size for this piece. And then we'll go back. I'm gonna lay it down, and then you can just use any kind of regular bath towel.
Somebody's asking, why do you soak the paper and for how long?
I just soak it till it feels that it has had a lot of water. Like you can just feel that it's completely soaked through. You really don't want it to turn back to pulp, so you don't want to soak it for too long. I say on average like 10 minutes.
What's the reasoning for the soak?
The soak is so that the paper will absorb the paint better. Otherwise, it will feel really dry when it is on top. So what I do is you lay down your plexiglass surface face up, so the paint is facing me, and then you lay your paper very carefully, and I'm not doing any registration here, so this is not going to be completely centered. Then you want to make sure that it's down. And since we're going to be using this, I really should be a little bit higher so I can put more pressure. So I'm just going to get a milk crate and stand on that. Ready to roll. And since I'm doing this at home, I'm probably gonna want to do a couple. Alright, you really hope that it doesn't move. And you just peel it off. Then you have a print. The pressure isn't as it would be if you had done it on an etching press, but I kind of like it. It almost looks like a pencil drawing. So each time you do this, it gets a different look. And you can even use this again. You can work back into your original painting, and you can make another one, or you could print this and it could be a ghost print. So this is like a finished piece. Maybe I want to work back into it though. So I think I will. I like how there's variation in the texture here, but I don't like how it's all one texture. For me, I think I'm going to darken a few things and leave a few things as is. Very quick work on paper. If you were to paint this directly on, like oil onto paper, it would take much longer because the way you would be painting on a dry surface, and it would absorb the oil, and it would just take much longer to work and to blend.
Somebody asked, I missed the beginning. What paint are you using?
I'm using oil paint, just regular oil paint. that I have left over on my palette from when I'm working on canvas.
What's that tool called that you put the pressure?
That is a pin press. And you can use any kind of, you can use a lot of different rollers. You could even use like a rolling pin that you would use for baking. But you want something really heavy. This thing is like a good, I would say 8 pounds or almost 10 pounds. If you go on to McLean's printmaking supplies, I think that they have a pin press. That's where I got that from, but that was like 10 years ago. I think we're almost done with this print.
So you could use other inks, somebody's asking.
Yes, you could use acrylic, you could use ink, you could use really anything that would sit on a surface and absorb into paper. I wouldn't use enamel. And maybe I wanted to do 2 versions of this. So I'm gonna go walk over and get another piece of paper.
I'm getting better.
And then I might use that as a template to make a more direct painting on paper. And because this is my ghost print, I might want it to be a little bit wetter so that it will receive the ink that's left over on that plate. This is also thinner paper, so it's not going to absorb as much.
So what does it mean, ghost print?
So this is the ghost print is the leftover ink from my first run. So I would say would be the second run is the ghost print. And normally I would work back into it a little bit on this surface. Maybe I will. Just really quickly. But every time you do this, it's going to be completely unique. It's not going to be the same painting that you ran the first time. And again, you want to make sure that everything stays pretty thin on your surface.
Very quickly, somebody just showed up and said, "What surface are you painting on?"
I'm painting on some plexiglass. So the plexiglass is a non-absorbent ground, which will allow for the oil paint or any kind of paint to sit upon the surface, and it's not going to ever be absorbed. It might dry out, but you would be able to flake it off. So we call them plates, plexiglass plate. And you want to work really fast because I have my paper out. It's already...
Somebody asked, any side of the plexiglass? Is there like
yeah,
one?
any side of the plexiglass. It should be the same on both sides. All right. So there will be a little bit left over from the last print, but not much. You really...
How do you know how hard to go on the
You go as
with the
hard
pin?
as you can. And so it's much lighter because I didn't paint as much, but you can work back into it, and that's probably what I would do. So you can see the two different versions here. First run, second run, and I did work back into this one a little bit. Anyways, so that's monotype making. Very simple. Does anybody have any questions? All right, well, thanks for joining me again today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.